They call it logistics, but I call it the precise orchestration of 3,000 tons of steel, rubber, and human endurance moving at 70 miles per hour across the continental United States. My name is Dennis. I am 58 years old, and for the past 22 years I have been the invisible foundation holding Vanguard Freight Systems together. You likely do not know my name, but if you have ever purchased a heavy-duty toaster in the Midwest, fresh avocados in the freezing month of February, or a backup generator following a massive hurricane on the coastline, I am the exact reason those items arrived safely. I hold the official title of Contract Renewal Specialist, which is merely corporate jargon for the man who knows every single hidden secret, every vulnerable pressure point, and every crucial negotiation tactic within the entire supply chain industry. I do not occupy a corner office with a panoramic view of the city skyline. Instead, I work from a cramped cubicle that perpetually smells like stale coffee and overheated printer toner, buried deep within the operational bowels of the corporate building. I honestly prefer it this way. The quiet isolation allows me to concentrate on the complex hum of the massive industrial machine. I know precisely when a port strike on the western seaboard is going to delay a critical delivery in the Central Plains 3 full days before the union leader even decides to print the picket signs. I know exactly which trucking consortiums are artificially inflating their mileage reports, and which independent drivers will bravely navigate through a blinding blizzard simply because they owe me a personal favor from a decade ago. Before I explain how I legally dismantled a billion-dollar empire with a single carefully worded email, you must understand that I never desired to be a hero or a villain. I merely wanted to perform my job with dignity and competence. The systemic problems began, as they often do in family-owned enterprises, with a change in leadership. The original founder, Walter, did not pass away, but he retired to an extravagant vineyard overseas that likely cost more than the gross domestic product of a small island nation. Walter was a difficult man to work for, certainly, but he was a seasoned veteran who intimately understood the volatile price of diesel fuel and the grueling realities of the road. We shared a mutual respect built on decades of hard-fought success. I kept his trucks moving efficiently, and he ensured my compensation cleared without issue. Then came his son, Travis. Travis was 32 years old, armed with a Master of Business Administration degree from an elite university that his wealthy father had essentially purchased by donating a massive library wing. Travis possessed teeth so unnaturally white they appeared practically radioactive under the fluorescent office lights. He marched into the executive suite wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my personal vehicle, radiating the kind of unearned arrogance that only immense generational wealth can provide. He could not distinguish a standard pallet jack from a burlap potato sack, yet suddenly he was the undisputed captain of the corporate ship. During his very first week in charge, he installed expensive, unnecessary amenities in the executive lounge while simultaneously terminating the entire overnight janitorial staff in a misguided attempt to outsource for supposed operational efficiency. Naturally, the facilities deteriorated within 48 hours. By his third month, he was constantly parading around the operations floor with a much younger woman named Crystal, whom he had appointed as the new director of corporate culture, a completely fabricated title designed solely to justify her lucrative salary. I kept my head down and focused entirely on my complex responsibilities. I am a consummate professional. I have successfully navigated through 3 major economic recessions, a global health crisis, and a crippling cyber attack that forced me to route hundreds of cross-country shipments using physical paper maps and roadside public telephones. I genuinely believed I could outlast Travis and his profound incompetence. However, the friction between us developed gradually, much like destructive sand grinding inside a crucial gearbox. Travis deeply resented my presence. To him, I represented a legacy system. I was an analog employee in his digital fantasy. I was an older man in a faded sweater who adamantly refused to use modern instant messaging applications because I vastly preferred to pick up the receiver and negotiate directly with disgruntled union representatives until the task was accomplished. To Travis, I was a useless relic, To me, he was merely a fragile hood ornament on a massive commercial truck, shiny and prominent, but completely useless when confronted with a real obstacle. The dynamic fundamentally shifted on a stressful Tuesday afternoon. I was deeply immersed in an incredibly complex renegotiation of a massive service contract with the Southern Coastal Stevedores Union. These labor representatives were notoriously uncompromising negotiators who demanded absolute perfection. I had been on the telephone with their chief representative for 4 exhausting hours, carefully massaging a 2% rate increase into a comprehensive deal that would effectively secure our southern shipping lanes for another 5 full years. Travis casually breezed past my workspace, with Crystal trailing closely behind him. Without even breaking his stride, he loudly criticized the appearance of my desk, claiming the accumulated paperwork presented a poor optical image for potential investors. My desk was systematically covered in essential bills of lading, complex shipping manifests, and legal pads filled with my detailed calculations. It was the literal nervous system of the entire logistics company. I firmly informed him that I was in the middle of securing the Southern Coastal renewal, warning him that interrupting my process would cost the company access to crucial southern ports. He stopped, offered a patronizing smile, and suggested I digitize everything immediately, completely dismissing the immediate critical nature of the negotiation. I managed to save the deal that day. That single contract generated $40 million in pure revenue for the company over the subsequent financial quarter. I received no gratitude, only a formal warning regarding the clean desk policy. But the absolute breaking point occurred in the middle of the busy autumn season. The freight volume was peaking, and I was working 12-hour days fueled by sheer willpower. An email arrived demanding mandatory attendance at an extravagant weekend celebration honoring Travis on his 33rd birthday at the family estate. The event fell on the busiest Saturday of the entire month, a day I was personally required to oversee the delicate customs clearance for a massive international shipment of temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals. If delayed, the cargo would spoil, resulting in millions of dollars in insurance liabilities. I politely declined the invitation, explaining the critical operational conflict. I assumed my professional dedication would be understood. I was completely wrong. The consequences of prioritizing the company's survival over a narcissist birthday party would soon become the catalyst for the greatest legal retaliation the logistics industry had ever witnessed. The following morning, the atmosphere within the corporate office felt noticeably different, possessing a heavy silence that typically precedes a massive, severe weather event. My colleagues actively avoided making eye contact with me. I settled into my chair and entered my secure login credentials, only to be instantly greeted by a harsh notification indicating my access had been explicitly denied. Assuming a routine system error, I meticulously typed my password a second time. Once again, the system firmly rejected my credentials. As I reached for my desk telephone, I heard the unmistakable rhythmic clicking of expensive leather loafers approaching my cubicle. Travis possessed a booming, aggressive voice that he often used to compensate for his lack of actual authority. He marched toward my desk, abandoning his usual superficial smile. He was strategically flanked by Crystal, who was ironically clutching a physical clipboard despite her constant preaching about digitization, and 2 imposing security guards. Travis smoothed his bright red silk tie and arrogantly announced that the company was pivoting toward a more agile leadership structure. He explicitly cited my refusal to integrate with the corporate culture, a thinly veiled reference to my absence from his lavish birthday party, as the final intolerable offense. The silence that followed his declaration stretched out. I stared directly into his eyes, refusing to display any panic. I calmly stated that he was terminating my employment, simply because I chose to safeguard a multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical shipment rather than watch him consume expensive alcoholic beverages. Crystal immediately chimed in, aggressively insisting that the company required personnel who vibrated on a higher collaborative frequency. I kept my voice dangerously level, explaining in precise detail that I personally managed the complex contracts for 3,000 individual vendors. I explicitly reminded him that I was the sole authorized signatory for the Western Seaboard Port Authority, the Regional Teamsters Union, and the International Customs Alliance. I warned him that if I left the premises, those vital relationships and legal authorizations would not simply transfer to a cloud computing server. Travis laughed, producing a dry, ugly sound devoid of genuine amusement. He confidently declared that every single employee was entirely replaceable, citing it as basic business knowledge, and aggressively demanded I surrender my identification badge before security forcibly escorted me from the building. I did not scream or shed a single tear. I slowly stood up, retrieved my plastic identification badge, and deliberately dropped it into his outstretched hand. I calmly told him to wish his father good luck on my behalf. Travis sneered, retorting that his father was currently vacationing in Europe and did not care about the opinions of disposable help. I simply nodded, grabbed my personal belongings, and calmly walked toward the exit. As the elevator doors slowly closed, I casually checked my wristwatch. It was precisely 14 minutes past 9 in the morning. I knew with absolute certainty that by 9:30, the first massive wave of commercial trucks would be arriving at the primary way station in the central region, triggering the consequences of tearing the central nervous system out of a living corporate entity. I walked deliberately across the expansive parking lot to my modest vehicle. I did not immediately start the engine. Instead, I sat in the driver's seat and transitioned seamlessly into crisis management mode. I retrieved my personal cellular telephone and opened my private email application, utilizing the specific address I had provided to every major vendor over the past 20 years solely for absolute emergencies. I began drafting a legally bulletproof communication. I formally notified them of a critical change in authorized representation. I stated clearly that effective immediately, I was no longer employed by Vanguard Freight Systems and was subsequently stripping my authorization from all active service level agreements. I explicitly directed their attention to Clause 7B of our standard Master Service Agreement. Many years ago, when our credit rating was exceptionally precarious, vendors were intensely nervous about securing payment. To soothe their financial anxieties, I had personally authored and inserted Clause 7B, a strict fiduciary duty and key personnel continuity provision. This legally binding clause unequivocally stated that if the primary relationship manager departed the organization, the vendor possessed the absolute legal right to immediately suspend all services and demand instantaneous cash payment up front until the new management team was thoroughly vetted and approved. Travis was completely unaware of Clause 7B. I meticulously sent the formal notification to the Regional Trucking Consortium, the Coastal Port Authority, and the International Border Brokerage. Every single message I transmitted effectively cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in delayed operations and breached contract penalties. My telephone began to vibrate violently. The chief representative from the Southern Union called, his voice rumbling with confusion. I calmly explained that Travis had terminated me for a lack of cultural fit. The union leader barked a harsh laugh, confirming that without my certified signature on the hazardous materials clearance documents, his drivers would absolutely refuse to transport the volatile chemical shipments. He confirmed his strict adherence to the safety protocols outlined in Clause 7B, officially declaring that his trucks were immediately parking. I smiled, acknowledging the successful toppling of the first massive domino. I started my vehicle and drove toward a familiar diner located 3 miles from the corporate headquarters. It was a rugged establishment favored by long-haul drivers, featuring worn vinyl booths and exceptionally strong coffee. It was the absolute perfect location to establish my temporary command post. I secured a table in the corner, ordered a full pot of coffee, and connected my laptop computer to the public wireless network. My cellular telephone continued to ring, incessantly displaying incoming calls from frantic dispatchers, confused customs brokers, and eventually the main corporate line belonging to Travis. I watched his name flash across the digital screen, deliberately allowing it to ring without an answer. The massive logistical heart of the empire was rapidly freezing solid. The modest diner steadily filled with a boisterous lunchtime crowd. creating a chaotic symphony of clattering ceramic plates and aggressive working-class gossip. Completely hidden within this mundane environment, I sat quietly in my corner booth, actively serving as the silent conductor of an unprecedented corporate disaster. My laptop screen transformed into a comprehensive dashboard of absolute ruin. The publicly accessible fleet tracking website was now overwhelmingly populated with stationary red markers. A particularly dense cluster of stalled vehicles had formed aggressively near the major central distribution hub. The secure access codes for that specific facility were strictly rotated on a weekly basis, a task I manually executed every Monday morning. Because my employment was abruptly terminated before I could distribute the new security credentials, the massive iron gates remained firmly locked, preventing dozens of incoming vehicles from delivering their vital cargo. My personal telephone vibrated, displaying a frantic text message from the dedicated payroll manager. She frantically informed me that Travis was actively screaming in the executive hallway, loudly accusing me of intentionally sabotaging the primary corporate servers because he could absolutely not access the secure vendor portal. I allowed myself a brief, genuine chuckle. I had simply adhered to the stringent security protocols established 5 years prior by the heavily outsourced technology department. They had explicitly configured the two-factor authentication system to route the necessary security codes directly to my personal cellular device for emergency access. Travis had never bothered to understand the fundamental architecture of his own digital infrastructure. I casually replied to the payroll manager, suggesting he might want to act quickly, though I intentionally provided no actual code. As I consumed a piece of dry toast, the corporate panic dramatically escalated. My telephone rang, displaying the direct office line of the newly appointed director of corporate culture. Against my better judgment, I answered the call, allowing a perfectly calm and professional tone to enter my voice. Crystal immediately began shrieking into the receiver, her voice shrill and echoing with undisguised panic. She breathlessly demanded that I surrendered the master passwords immediately, hysterically claiming that the stranded truck drivers were actively contacting local law enforcement because they were completely trapped. I firmly refused her demand. I explicitly cited the Federal Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, casually mentioning that sharing encrypted corporate security credentials with unauthorized personnel constituted a severe federal crime. I asked her rhetorically if she truly wanted me to risk federal imprisonment, simply because her new leadership structure failed to plan for basic contingency operations. An utterly stunned, breathless silence fell over the line before Travis snatched the telephone from her hands. His voice was tight, severely strained, and entirely stripped of the arrogant confidence he had displayed just hours earlier. He aggressively threatened to initiate a massive lawsuit against me for intentional corporate sabotage. I leaned closer to the receiver, reminding him of his own confident declaration that I was entirely replaceable. I sarcastically suggested that his highly agile leadership team should easily possess the necessary skills to coordinate a manual password reset with the external technology provider. Travis exploded in a fit of rage, hysterically revealing that the company currently had 400 tons of premium frozen seafood idling dangerously in the intense southern heat, warning that the cargo would spoil completely if the refrigeration units failed. I calmly inquired if he had remembered to manually authorize the specialized fuel card renewals for the refrigeration fleet. I heard a loud, violent thud on the other end of the line, sounding remarkably like a heavy fist striking a solid mahogany desk. Travis desperately commanded me to return to the office, offering vague promises of dropping the impending lawsuit. I politely declined his offer and promptly terminated the connection. I immediately accessed my personal contacts and dispatched a secure message to the veteran yard foreman managing the Southern Cold Storage facility. I authorized him to connect the refrigeration trailers directly to the facility's emergency shore power grid, charging the massive electrical expense to a deeply hidden contingency account I had fully funded 3 years prior for exactly this type of unprecedented disaster. The foreman replied instantly, confirming the seafood was safe. The cargo was secure, the drivers were protected, but Travis remained completely doomed. I carefully considered which major entities stood to gain the most significant advantage from the rapid, spectacular collapse of Vanguard Freight Systems. The obvious answer was our fiercest regional competitor, Global Logistics Incorporated. Their aggressive vice president of strategic expansion, Julian, had relentlessly attempted to recruit me for over a decade. I retrieved my telephone and dialed Julian's private number. He casually inquired if I had finally grown exhausted of constantly saving the world for inadequate compensation. I stated clearly and concisely that my employment had been terminated that morning. He demanded to know my exact location and ordered me to remain exactly where I was, promising to dispatch a private vehicle immediately. I explicitly stated that I was not coming to his organization alone. I promised to bring the massive Western Port Authority, the entire Southern Teamsters Union, and the critical Northern Border Control agencies directly with me. Julian laughed, a deep sound of pure predatory joy, and promised the vehicle would arrive shortly. The true negotiation was about to begin. A massive, sleek black luxury sedan pulled smoothly into the gravel parking lot of the modest diner, looking entirely absurd parked next to mud-splattered commercial rigs. A burly driver wearing a dark suit stepped out and respectfully opened the rear door for me. As the vehicle glided silently onto the interstate highway, heading toward the affluent financial district, I checked the industry trade publications on my mobile device. Headlines blared about massive unexpected outages at Vanguard Freight Systems and widespread reports of independent truckers absolutely refusing to move scheduled loads. I was actively trending within a highly specialized, crucial sector of the national economy. The vehicle eventually arrived at an exclusive, dimly lit steakhouse where the waitstaff wore formal attire. Julian was already waiting at a secluded corner table. He possessed the polished, calculating demeanor of a corporate predator. He bluntly bypassed the pleasantries, confirming that his dispatchers were completely overwhelmed by desperate, massively inflated spot market requests as Vanguard's abandoned freight flooded the open boards. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp and focused, asking the critical question of why the unions and independent drivers were staging an uncoordinated, massive work stoppage simply because a middle manager had been dismissed. I corrected him instantly, explaining that I was never merely a middle manager. I was the fundamental insurance policy for every vendor and driver in the network. Julian formally offered me a massive executive vice president title with a compensation package that doubled my previous salary. I stared directly at him and rejected the standard offer. I demanded absolute autonomy, proposing to create a completely independent strategic division within Global Logistics Incorporated. I promised to bring my extensive book of loyal business and my trusted vendors, demanding that I report only to him and the board of directors. Julian tapped his expensive pen on the heavy linen tablecloth, observing that I was demanding the practical power of a chief executive. I firmly stated I was offering him a massive, ready-made empire just waiting to be claimed from the dying carcass of Vanguard. Julian smiled a genuinely terrifying smile and agreed to the unprecedented terms. While we waited for the legal documents to be quickly drafted, my telephone buzzed intensely. It was an emergency alert from the Federal Department of Transportation detailing a catastrophic incident involving a Vanguard commercial vehicle, resulting in a massive hazardous materials spill. My stomach dropped violently. I immediately contacted the Southern Union representative, who breathlessly confirmed my worst fears. He explained that after his certified drivers legally refused to move the volatile chemical load, an increasingly desperate Travis had utilized a digital freight application to hire an unvetted, non-union independent contractor. The replacement driver completely lacked the necessary hazardous materials endorsements, took a sharp curve far too aggressively, and jackknifed the massive trailer, spilling highly toxic industrial solvents across multiple lanes of federal highway. The union leader grimly confirmed that federal environmental protection agents were already swarming the crash site. The situation had instantly escalated from a severe logistical delay to a massive federal criminal investigation. The Department of Transportation would undoubtedly mandate an immediate, total suspension of all Vanguard operations, pending a comprehensive safety audit. I abruptly stood up from the expensive table, abandoning the untouched meal. I explained to Julian that I needed to secure my people and prepare for the inevitable legal fallout. The blatant negligence displayed by Travis was a devastating violation of federal law, and I needed absolute proof that I bore zero responsibility for the environmental disaster. I directed the hired vehicle to take me to an isolated industrial park located on the far edge of the city. This nondescript warehouse served as the primary physical archive for Vanguard's extensive historical records. I still possessed a physical key and navigated the dusty aisles until I located the specific storage boxes containing the original indemnity clauses signed by the founder, Walter, years prior. These crucial legal documents explicitly stated that absolute safety compliance and final operational liability rested solely with the active chief executive officer. I needed these original physical copies to legally prove that the chain of custody broke the exact second I was terminated, placing the immense burden of gross negligence squarely on Travis. As I carefully extracted the heavily bound folder, the loud grinding noise of the main metal door rolling upward echoed through the cavernous space. I turned calmly and faced Simon, the veteran general counsel for Vanguard Freight Systems. Simon looked incredibly haggard, quietly informing me that federal agents were currently swarming the corporate headquarters, aggressively seizing servers and confiscating physical files. He described a pathetic scene where Travis was literally sobbing inside his locked executive office, while Crystal attempted to livestream a tearful apology on social media. Simon revealed that the board of directors desperately wanted to offer me a massive, unconditional financial settlement. In exchange, they wanted me to return to the company and officially testify to the federal investigators that the tragic accident was merely the result of a temporary miscommunication during a complex leadership transition. I bluntly rejected his blatant attempt to bribe me into committing federal perjury. I stated firmly that a man was hospitalized and toxic chemicals were currently being scrubbed off a federal highway. I informed Simon that I was taking the most competent employees and the most lucrative contracts directly to Global Logistics. He quietly asked if Walter, who was currently flying back from Europe, knew about my actions. I tucked the critical legal file securely into my bag and stated that Walter would know very soon because I intended to personally intercept him at the airport to deliver the final blow. I directed the hired driver to immediately transport me to the private aviation terminal on the outskirts of the sprawling city. The turbulent weather had finally cleared, leaving behind a violently purple sky as the sun began to set. I instructed the driver to park discreetly near the high-security fence, maintaining a clear view of the primary runway. Within moments, a sleek, gleaming white corporate jet descended rapidly from the clouds, its tires screeching harshly against the tarmac. Walter, the formidable founder of the empire, had finally returned. I patiently waited near the designated pickup zone where his personal chauffeur normally idled. Predictably, the chauffeur was completely absent, likely trapped in the administrative chaos currently swallowing the corporate headquarters. The heavy aircraft door lowered and Walter descended the steps. Despite his advanced age, he moved with the aggressive energy of a charging bull. He was shouting violently into his cellular telephone, practically radiating pure fury. He aggressively scanned the empty parking lot before his piercing eyes finally locked onto my waiting figure. He stormed toward me, furiously demanding to know why his massive company was currently valued at a fraction of its worth from that morning. I calmly instructed him to enter the vehicle, bluntly pointing out that his incompetent son had likely fired the entire dispatch team. Walter stared at me, his face flushing a dangerous shade of crimson, before aggressively yanking the heavy car door open and sliding onto the leather seat. As the vehicle smoothly accelerated away from the airfield, Walter bitterly accused me of intentionally destroying his entire legacy. I firmly corrected him, stating that I had simply turned on the lights. He was the one who had recklessly left a foolish child alone in a room full of matches. I systematically detailed the entire catastrophic chain of events. I explained how Travis had arrogantly terminated my employment, effectively triggering the defensive legal mechanisms embedded in Clause 7B. I described the resulting gridlock and finally, the devastating hazardous materials spill caused directly by Travis hiring an uncertified driver to bypass the frozen union operations. I explicitly informed Walter that the Federal Department of Transportation was actively shutting down the entire fleet, and the resulting massive environmental fines would completely drain the remaining corporate liquidity. Walter turned to look directly at me, his sharp eyes filled with intense anger and deep sorrow. He quietly asked if I was executing this elaborate scheme simply to demand my position back with a massive salary increase. I firmly rejected the notion, stating clearly that I was completely finished with Vanguard Freight Systems. I informed him that I was permanently transferring the vast majority of the supply chain network to Global Logistics. Walter slumped heavily against the plush leather seat, releasing a dry, wheezing chuckle that sounded remarkably like genuine defeat. He muttered about Clause 7B, finally acknowledging the absolute brilliance of the legal trap I had established years prior. As we approached the chaotic corporate headquarters, Walter asked if I would remain if he personally fired Travis. I looked at the crumbling building and firmly said no. He slowly nodded, accepting his fate, and walked alone toward the flashing lights, a defeated King returning to his burning castle. I immediately directed the driver to return to the exclusive steakhouse. Julian was patiently waiting, the extensive legal documents prepared and resting on the table. I quickly reviewed the binding contract, ensuring the absolute autonomy clause remained intact, and firmly signed my name, officially becoming the Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations. Julian smiled, welcoming me to the winning side. For the next several hours, I sat in a massive leather chair and systematically dismantled my former life. I contacted the massive Western Port Authority, the various regional trucking consortiums, and the critical border control agencies, efficiently routing all their stranded operations directly into the Global Logistics network. By late evening, I had successfully captured over 60% of Vanguard's active volume, securing an unprecedented victory for my new employer. Later that night, I received a frantic text message from the loyal payroll manager who had remained at the chaotic Vanguard headquarters. She breathlessly detailed the final, pathetic chapter of the corporate collapse. Travis had indeed been formally terminated by his furious father and subsequently disinherited from the massive family fortune. However, in a final, desperate act of vindictive stupidity, before security escorted him from the premises, Travis had attempted to send a mass email to the entire staff. He intended to attach a document he wrongly believed contained damning evidence of my supposed corporate sabotage. Instead, blinded by sheer panic and rage, he accidentally attached a highly sensitive, unprotected internal spreadsheet. The spreadsheet was a meticulously maintained record of massive consulting fees completely diverted to various fraudulent shell companies. It unequivocally proved that Travis had been aggressively embezzling millions of dollars from the corporate accounts to fund extravagant personal wellness retreats and lucrative aesthetic enhancements for Crystal. This was no longer merely a case of gross operational incompetence. It was a massive, highly documented federal felony. The payroll manager confirmed that the federal investigators, already on site due to the hazardous materials spill, had immediately intercepted the email. I smiled deeply as I read her final message, which described local law enforcement placing Travis in heavy steel handcuffs outside a trendy local bar. I had not simply frozen a massive empire. I had legally ensured that the men who destroyed it would face absolute justice, while I comfortably built a stronger, infinitely more profitable future on the ashes they left behind.